Mental Health 101 is created to empower our, of course, mental health awareness. Another week, another great episode, and the fragile genius Brain Wilson's battle with mental illness and the music achieve.
This is how the Beach Boys' mastermind turned pain into one of pop music's greatest legacies. And this is The Fragile Genius, a story of Brian Wilson, since we lost him recently. And he did have some battles with mental illness himself.
Yes, interesting. So, what's the cost of beauty, Mr. Mick? What's the toll of hearing music that sounds like God smiled on it?
It's a great quote from Brian Wilson, 1988. Love and mercy, that's what you need tonight. You can picture this. In 1966, a 24-year-old sits alone at a piano in his Beverly Hills mansion, surrounded by a symphony of sound that exists only in his mind. The test of the world hears, and the rest of the world hears silence. He hears orchestras. He hears voices, some angelic, some terrifying. He's trying to capture something that's never been captured before, the sound of innocence colliding with experience, of joy wrestling with sorrow. This is Brian Wilson, not just the man behind the Beach Boys, not just the force behind Pet Sounds and Good Vibrations. This is the story of the man who tried to write a teenage symphony to God while battling voices in his head, voices that weren't always singing. Brian Wilson's life reads like a novel where genius and madness dance on the same thin wire. Like Vincent van Gogh, Virginia Woolf, and Friedrich Nietzsche before him, Wilson exists in that space where immense creativity comes tangled with profound suffering. But here's the question that haunts every conversation about creative genius: is suffering the price of brilliance? Is there beauty in the breakdown? Or is that just a myth we tell ourselves to excuse tragedy? More importantly, how do we honor the artist while caring for the human being? This isn't just a story about mental illness, it's about resilience, about the long, uneven road to healing, about how a man, once lost in silence, found a way to sing again. It's about what happens when we replace the romanticized myth of the tortured genius with something more honest, more hopeful. The story of survival, recovery, and the radical act of continuing to create despite everything. Brian Wilson's journey offers profound lessons for anyone who has felt broken, misunderstood, or trapped in their mind. In conclusion, his story teaches us that healing is possible, that support systems matter, and that sometimes the most courageous thing you can do is to ask for help.
What shaped Brian Wilson into the musical genius we know, and were there early warning signs for his mental health struggles, Mr. Mike?
Before we understand the breakdown, we need to understand the building blocks. Brian Douglas Wilson was born on June 20th, 1942, in Inglewood, California, into a family where music was both salvation and weapon. His father, Murray Wilson, was a frustrated musician who projected his unfulfilled dreams onto his three sons with the intensity of a heat lamp. Murray was volatile, controlling, and often violent. He hit Brian so hard during one encounter that he permanently damaged his hearing in his right ear, a cruel irony for someone destined to create some of the most beautiful sounds in popular music. But here's what's crucial to understand: Brian's musical genius wasn't born from trauma, it was born despite it. When the Wilson household erupted into chaos, Brian found refuge at the family piano. He discovered that when he played, the world made sense. When he sang harmonies with his brothers Dennis and Carl, the sharp edges of his father's anger softened into something beautiful. From childhood, Brian showed signs of what we now recognize as neurodivergence. He was hypersensitive to sound, texture, and emotion. He could hear musical intervals that others couldn't distinguish. He felt everything more intensely, the good and the bad. This sensitivity, this ability to feel deeply, would later fuel both his creativity and his suffering. It's a pattern we see repeatedly in creative individuals. The same neural writing that makes them extraordinary artists also makes them vulnerable to mental health challenges. As Dr. Sarah Chen, a neuropsychologist, explained, What we're learning about creative brains is they often have more connections between different regions, more openness to sensory input, and more emotional reactivity. These traits can be superpowers in art, but they also can be overwhelming in daily life. By his teens, Brian was already displaying the perfectionism and anxiety that would later characterize his mental health struggles. He would spend hours at the piano, working on chord progressions, searching for the perfect sound. His family remembers him as intense, driven, but also fragile, a young man carrying the weight of enormous expectations. Brian's expectations led him to form the Beach Boys in 1961 when Brian was just 19. Their early surf rock hits made them celebrities, but for Brian, success came with an overwhelming price. The constant touring, the pressure to produce hits, the family dynamics now playing out on a global stage, it all began to take its toll. Like many of us, our greatest strength is our largest weakness. Brian's pursuit of musical perfection was both his greatest strength and his greatest vulnerability. He would spend entire days in the studio, layering track upon track, searching for sounds that existed only in his imagination. This obsession to detail created masterpieces, but it also created enormous psychological pressure. Musicians who worked with him during this period describe a young man who was brilliant but increasingly isolated. He would arrive at sessions with complex arrangements written out in his head, but he struggled to communicate with people. He was becoming a prisoner of his genius. The touring stopped abruptly in 1964 when Brian suffered what was then called nervous breakdown on a plane. He was 22 years old, and the weight of expectation was already crushing him. In conclusion, his decision to stop touring and focus on studio work was both a creative breakthrough and a warning sign.
Tell us about the Pet Sounds period, Mr. Mick. How did Brian's mental state influence his most acclaimed work?
If you want to understand Brian Wilson's mind at its most brilliant and most vulnerable, listen to Pet Sounds. Released in 1966, it's widely considered one of the greatest albums ever made. It's also the sound of a young man trying to make sense of loneliness, love, and the crushing weight of growing up. Brian created Pet Sounds during a period of intense isolation. While his bandmates toured, he spent months in the studio working with session musicians, crafting what he called a teenage symphony to God. The album is musically sophisticated, featuring orchestral arrangements, unconventional instruments, and production techniques that wouldn't be matched for decades. But listen to the lyrics, listen to the emotion. These aren't just songs, they're prayers from someone drowning in sensitivity. Brian's method during this period was both genius and concerning. He would work for days without sleep. Fueled by caffeine and an increasing array of drugs, he would leave dozens of tracks searching for the perfect sound. Musicians describe sessions where Brian would make them play the same part for hours, chasing something only he could hear. Session musician Hal Blaine recalled, Brian would have us play 4 bars over and over, 50 times until he got exactly what he wanted. You could see the obsession in his eyes. It was beautiful and frightening at the same time. The album's centerpiece, God Only Knows, is a masterpiece of a harmonic complexity and emotional vulnerability. To fully appreciate his creative genius, listen to the isolated vocal on the track and bask in the beauty of the piece. I have this actually on my Substack page as well. It's a love song crafted like a prayer, created by a young man who was beginning to lose his grip on reality, but still believed in the power of music to heal. Following Pet Sounds, Brian embarked on an even more ambitious project, Smile. It was meant to be a teenage symphony to God, a song cycle that would revolutionize popular music, but the sessions became a nightmare of perfectionism, drug use, and increasing paranoia. Brian's mental state during the Smile sessions was deteriorating rapidly. He was using LSD regularly, not recreationally, but as a creative tool. He believed the drug was helping him access higher levels of consciousness, but it was accelerating his psychological breakdown. The studio became his refuge and his prison. He would spend entire days working on single songs, adding layers of instrumentation, vocals, and sound effects. The music was extraordinary, complex, beautiful, and completely unprecedented, but Brian was losing touch with reality. As Dr. Michael Rodriguez, a psychiatrist, explains, what we see in Brian's story during this period is classic symptoms of what we now understand as schizoaffective disorder. The creativity and the illness were deeply intertwined, but the illness was not the source of the creativity. It was threatening to destroy it. In 1967, under enormous pressure from his record label and struggling with his mental health, Brian abandoned Smile. The decision haunted him for decades. He later described it as the moment when my heart broke. The unfinished masterpiece became a symbol of lost potential, creative paralysis, and the price of genius. The collapse of Smile marked the beginning of Brian's darkest period. He retreated from the world, spending months in bed, eating compulsively, and struggling with auditory hallucinations. The man who had created some of the most joyful music in history was drowning in despair. But here's what's crucial to understand: Brian's breakdown wasn't romantic or beautiful. It was terrifying, destructive, and nearly fatal. The myth of the tortured genius tells us that suffering is necessary for great art. In conclusion, Brian's story teaches us something different: that genius can survive despite suffering, but only with proper support and treatment.
Brian's family brought in Dr. Eugene Lanley to help him in the 1970s. What started as a treatment becomes something much darker. Can you walk us through what happened, Mr. Mac?
By 1975, Brian Wilson was dying, not metaphorically, literally. He weighed over 300 pounds, was addicted to multiple substances, and was often incoherent. His family feared they would lose him. His creative output had dwindled to almost nothing. The man who had once conducted orchestras in his mind could barely get out of bed. Enter Dr. Eugene Landy, a psychologist who promised radical results through radical methods. Landy's approach was called 24-hour therapy, total immersion in the patient's life. He didn't just treat Brian, he moved in with him. He controlled his diet, his medications, his daily schedule, and eventually his entire life. At first, Landy's methods seemed miraculous. Brian lost weight dramatically, nearly 100 pounds in the first year. He became more alert, more articulate. He started exercising, eating healthy meals, and taking his medications consistently. For the first time in years, he appeared in public with the Beach Boys, performing at concerts and even giving interviews. Family members and friends were cautiously optimistic. Brian seemed to be returning to life. But underneath the surface improvements, something troubling was happening. Landy wasn't just treating Brian, he was controlling him. What started as intensive therapy gradually morphed into something much more sinister. Landy began inserting himself into every aspect of Brian's life. He took over Brian's business affairs, demanded writing credits on songs, and isolated Brian from friends and family members who questioned his methods. The warning signs were everywhere. Landy charged exorbitant fees, sometimes $35,000 per month. He maintained a staff of therapists who were enforcers. He controlled who Brian could see and speak with. He made himself Brian's business partner and co writer. He interfered in Brian's romantic relationships. By the 1980s, Brian was more isolated than ever, but now his isolation was enforced by someone claiming to help him. Landy had created a bubble around Brian that was virtually impenetrable. Family members were turned away from Brian's house. Old friends were told they were bad influences. Even Brian's children had limited access to their father. Carl Wilson, Brian's brother, later testified, Eugene Landy didn't cure Brian. He replaced one prison with another. Brian went from being a prisoner of his illness to being a prisoner of his doctor. The most disturbing aspect of Landy's treatment was how he weaponized Brian's mental illness. He convinced Brian that without him, Brian would die. He made Brian dependent not just on medication, but on Landy himself. This is a classic pattern in abusive relationships. The abuser positions themselves as the victim's savior while systematically destroying their autonomy. During the Landy years, Brian did create music, but even this was tainted by exploitation. He positioned himself as the force behind Brian's return to creativity, but those who worked with Brian during this period tell a different story. Studio engineer Mark Linnett recalls Brian was still Brian. The musical ideas were still coming from him, but Landy had inserted himself into the process in ways that were clearly unethical. He was taking credit for Brian's work. The 1988 solo album that included Love and Mercy was created during this period. While the song's lyrics speak of healing and hope, they take on a tragic irony when you understand the context. Brian was singing about love and mercy while being systematically exploited by someone who claimed to love him. By the late 1980s, Brian's family and legitimate friends began mounting a legal challenge to Landy's control. The case was complex because Brian himself defended Landy, a common occurrence in abusive relationships where the victim has been psychologically manipulated. The court case revealed the full extent of Landy's exploitation. He had been paid over $430,000 per year. He owned a percentage of Brian's publishing rights. He had no legitimate psychological credentials for the treatment he was providing. In 1989, a court order finally removed Landy from Brian's life permanently. The judge ruled that Landy had violated every ethical boundary to the therapeutic relationship and had caused Brian psychological harm. As Dr. Anya Bloom, ethics professor at Columbia University, explains, what happened with Landy is a cautionary tale about therapeutic power gone unchecked. Vulnerable patients must be protected by strong ethical boundaries, professional oversight, and family advocacy. Landy violated all these protections. The Landy years teach us crucial lessons. Beware of miracle cures. Real healing takes time and doesn't require total control. Maintain connections. Isolation from loved ones is a red flag, not a treatment method. Question authority. Even doctors can be wrong, exploitative, or harmful. In conclusion, advocate for yourself or your loved ones. Don't be afraid to challenge treatment that feels wrong.
Mr. Mick, after Landy was removed from Brian's life, how did Brian begin his real journey towards healing?
Recovery is not a clean arc with a clean beginning, middle, end. It's not a Hollywood movie where the protagonist has a breakthrough moment and everything gets better. Recovery is messy, nonlinear, and ongoing. It's filled with setbacks, plateaus, small victories, and the daily choice to keep moving forward. For Brian Wilson, real recovery began not with dramatic intervention, but with love and with learning to set healthy boundaries. In 1986, during the darkest period of the Landy years, Brian met Melinda Ledbetter. She was working as a car saleswoman and had no idea who he was when he walked into the dealership. Their first interactions were simple, normal, a refreshing change from the controlled environment Landy had created. Melinda was different from everyone else in Brian's life. She wasn't impressed by his fame, wasn't looking to profit from his talent, and wasn't trying to fix him. She simply saw him as a person worthy of love and respect. Despite Landy's interference, Brian and Melinda maintained a connection. She became his lifeline to the outside world, the one person who could see past the elaborate control system that had been built around him. When Landy tried to break them up, Melinda fought back, not with grand gestures, but with the quiet persistence and unwavering love. As Melinda herself has said, I didn't set out to save Brian. I just saw a man who needed someone to believe in him, someone who could love him without trying to control him. After Landy's legal removal in 1989, Melinda became Brian's partner in rebuilding his life. But this wasn't about taking care of him, it was about them learning to take care of each other. She encountered him to seek proper psychiatric care, to reconnect with his children, and to find his own voice again. One of the first steps in Brian's recovery was finding ethical, competent psychiatric care. After years of Landy's manipulative pseudotherapy, Brian needed to learn what real treatment looked like. This meant working with board certified psychiatrists, finding the right combination of medications, learning coping strategies for managing symptoms, and developing healthy routines and boundaries. As Dr. Michael Rodriguez, a psychiatrist, explains, Brian's case illustrates the importance of patient centered care. Real psychiatric treatment empowers patients to make their own decisions, maintains appropriate boundaries, and focuses on the patient's well being rather than the doctor's agenda. Brian's recovery also involved reconnecting with his spiritual side. Brian and Melinda married on February 6, 1995, at the iconic Wayfarers Chapel in Rancho Palos Verdes, an intimate wedding held in the glass and redwood glass church designed by Lloyd Bright and affiliated with the Swedenborgian Church of North America. Swedenborgian thoughts emphasizes the inner spiritual meaning of the Bible, the ongoing revelation of divine truth, and the belief that love in action is the highest form of worship. There's no public record that Wilson became a regular attendee of the church, but his choice of Wayfarers Chapel for the wedding suggests a spiritual sensibility. His later life reflects a kind of open, searching faith, less about organized religion, more about hope, healing, and mercy. He found comfort in faith and community. This wasn't about dramatic religious conversion, it was about finding peace and meaning in something larger than himself. As Brian's mental health stabilized, his relationship with music began to heal as well. For years, music had been associated with pressure, exploitation, and pain. Now, with proper support, he would rediscover music as a source of joy and expression. The return wasn't immediate or dramatic. Brian started slowly, playing piano at home, working on simple melodies, reconnecting with the pure joy of creating sound. Melinda encouraged him without pushing him. She understood that music had to be his choice, not an obligation. Musical therapist Angela Chavez explains, for Brian, music wasn't just an outlet, it was medicine. It gave him structure, emotional expression, and connection to others. But it had to be reclaimed on his own terms without the pressure and exploitation he'd experienced before. One of the most powerful moments in Brian's recovery came in 2004, nearly 40 years after he had abandoned the Smile Project. With Melinda's support and his mental health stabilized, Brian decided to finish what he had started. This wasn't just about completing an album, it was about healing an old wound, proving to himself that he could finish what he started, and reclaiming his artistic vision from the chaos of his past. The completed Smile album was a triumph, not just musically, but psychologically. Brian's recovery involved building a network of support that included Melinda as his primary emotional support and advocate, ethical mental health professionals, reconnecting with his children and surviving siblings, working with musical collaborators who respected his talent and boundaries, and finding meaning and connection in spiritual community. As Brian said in 2016 interview, I'm not cured. I don't think I'll ever be cured, but I'm healthy. I have love in my life. I have music. I have people who care about me. That's enough. This perspective is crucial for anyone struggling with mental health issues. Recovering doesn't mean becoming normal or eliminating all symptoms. In conclusion, it means learning to live well despite ongoing challenges.
Mr. Rick, what are the key lessons that ordinary people can take from Brian's Wilson's journey with mental illness and recovery?
Brian Wilson's journey from breakdown to recovery offers profound lessons for anyone who has struggled with mental illness, felt misunderstood, or wondering if healing is possible. His story demolishes harmful myths while offering genuine hope and practical guidance. First, mental illness is real, complex, and not a moral failing. Brian's transparency about his schizoaffective disorder has helped destigmatize mental illness in ways that are difficult to measure but impossible to ignore. When a cultural icon speaks openly about hearing voices, taking medication, and the ongoing nature of mental health management, it gives permission for others to do the same. Brian's openness paved the way for other artists to share their stories. Kanye West discussing bipolar disorder, Sinead O'Connor speaking about trauma and mental health, Justin Bieber sharing his struggles with depression and anxiety, and Billie Eilish talking about body dysmorphia and depression. Each disclosure helps normalize the conversation and reduces the shame that keeps people from seeking help. As Dr. Sarah Chen notes, when public figures share their mental health struggles authentically, it can literally save lives. It tells people that successful, talented individuals also struggle and that seeking help is a sign of strength, not weakness. Second, the tortured genius myth is harmful and false. Our culture has long romanticized the idea that suffering is necessary for great art. Brian's story exposes this myth as not just false, but actively harmful. His greatest creative periods were not when he was suffering most, but when he had enough stability to focus on his craft. Research shows that while there may be some correlation between creativity and certain mental health conditions, the relationship is complex. Creativity can be a coping mechanism, and the same brain patterns that enable creativity may increase vulnerability to mental illness, but suffering doesn't create talent, it often inhibits it. Brian's most productive periods came when he had adequate sleep and nutrition, stable relationships, proper mental health support, and time to create without external pressure. As Brian himself has said, my music didn't come back from being sick, it came from being human. The sickness almost killed the music. Third, exploitation thrives in silence and isolation. The Landy years teaches us that crucial lessons about how vulnerable people can be exploited, especially when they're isolated from support networks. Warning signs include isolation from family and friends, control over finances and decision making, discouraging questions or second opinions, creating dependency rather than independence, benefiting personally from the relationship, and violating professional boundaries. Fourth, recovery requires love, support, and healthy boundaries. Melinda's role in Brian's recovery illustrates the crucial importance of healthy relationships and mental health. Her approach offers a model for how to support someone without enabling or controlling them, providing unconditional love without unconditional enabling, encouragement without pressure, advocacy without control, and patience without martyrdom. Finally, society has a role in mental health. Brian's story highlights how society can either support or hinder recovery. We can create a more supportive society by reducing stigma through education and open conversation, ensuring access to quality mental health care, protecting vulnerable individuals from exploitation, supporting research and understanding, and creating environments where seeking help is normalized. In conclusion, his story permits us to be imperfect, to seek help, to take our time with healing, and to believe that our struggles don't define us, our response to them does.
Mr. Mick, as we wrap up Brian's story, what is the most important message you want listeners or viewers to take away?
As we mourn the passing of Brian, or really this chapter of his inspiring mental health journey, it's worth reflecting on what we've learned and how we can apply these lessons to our own lives and the lives of those we love. Brian's journey from the heights of creative genius to the depths of mental illness and back to a place of healing and stability is not just a celebrity story. It's a deeply human story about suffering, resilience, and the possibility of recovery. It's about the difference between surviving and thriving, between being managed and being free. If there's one thing Brian's story teaches us above all else, it's that hope is not naive, it's necessary. Hope is what keeps him alive during his darkest periods. Hope is what allowed him to trust Melinda's love. Hope is what gives him the courage to finish Smile and return to performing. These small acts of daily courage are available to us all. They don't require genius or fame. They require only the decision to keep going, to keep trying, to keep believing that our lives have value beyond our struggles. If you're supporting someone with mental illness, Melinda's example offers guidance. Love without trying to fix or control, encourage professional help while respecting autonomy, maintain your boundaries and self care, celebrate small victories, be patient with the process. Remember that you can't save someone, you can only love them. Healing is possible, love matters, and music, whether literal or metaphorical, can be a powerful force for healing. As Brian sang in Love and Mercy, that's what we all need tonight and every day. Love and mercy for ourselves, love and mercy for others, and the courage to keep singing even when the world feels silent. Let's honor the resilient soul who faces each day with courage, the fragile but determined human being who refuses to let their struggles define their stories. In conclusion, the music of healing is quiet sometimes, uncertain, but it never stops playing, and neither should we.
Yes, very well said, Mr. Nick. Very well said. The fragile genius Brian Wilson battle in mental illness and the music it shaped a compelling exploration of Brian Wilson's extraordinary musical legacy intertwined with his struggles with mental health. Mr. Mink, would you like to plug in something?
Thank you for the opportunity. On LinkedIn, create a valued book in 90 days. GMIC, the Dr. Digital Smith. You can ID the author coach, listen to the Dr. Digital podcast, and apply it as Burning
Yes, people love for Mr. Mink, the Dr. Digital. For sure, more and more empowering books to come. So, Mr. Rank, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, my friend. Until next time, stay
More time, people. See you soon.